Welcome to another episode of the Stuck in My Mind podcast. I am your host, WIZE. My next guest has an amazing story to tell, and I'm excited to have him on the show. Welcome to the show, Logan Hufford.
Thank you so much for having me on, brother. I appreciate it.
Oh man, the pleasure's all mine, brother. Pleasure's all mine. You got a story to share that it's an amazing story because there are people out there struggling with such an addiction as what you went through. So I'm glad to be able to share my platform with you and have you share your story. So let's just jump right into this.
Yeah.
Hold on a second. Let's see. Okay, come on. All right, here we go. So can you share with us your journey from addiction to recovery and how it all began?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so much to it, so I gotta kind of share it from a 30 or maybe even like 100,000 foot view, and we can zoom in on any points that you want to zoom in on. But I mean, so like right now in this moment, I'm 34 years old. I've been married for 13 years. We've got 4 boys, 12, 11, 10, and 8. And if you were to, follow my family on Facebook, or, you see us at church, we might look like, kind of a white picket fence, little, pretty neat little family, and mom and dad and the 4 boys. And we're out there goofing around in the yard and having fun with our puppies and the Alaskan wilderness and all these things. And yet to know where we were 9 years ago, 11 years ago, 13 years ago, none of this should be possible, because for the first several years of marriage, and even the year or so before we got married, I was a raging sex addict. That I had an addiction that started with pornography. It ultimately wasn't necessarily an addiction to a specific behavior. It was an addiction to chasing dopamine hits, chasing the adrenaline rush, chasing new and different things that I wanted, whether it was pornography, flirting with girls, getting attention, that kind of thing as a teenager, which then as I got older, it's okay, now I'm flirting with every woman in my path. I'm seeing what I can get, and, exercising these muscles of ultimately being a predator, just chasing after what I can take, chasing after what I can get from every interaction. And, pornography itself was the start of it, and it was at the core of it, and it is an incredibly destructive thing. And it went even beyond that. You got to the point where, as I say, when my wife and I were married and starting to raise kids, I'm having affairs. I'm hiring prostitutes. Porn continued as almost like a maintenance drug. I mean, it was never the thing that I was chasing after, but it was the thing that I would go to when I couldn't have, other things. And all this time, I'm married. I've got kids. There's a huge part of me that hates what I'm doing, that hated who I'd become, that hated how I was hurting my wife, and hated the fact that I couldn't go home and look my boys in the eye. Hated the fact that I was this monster, and yet I felt like I can't not do this. Like I don't know any other way to be. This is how I interact with women. This is how I am. And there was never a part of me that, like, I didn't blame my addiction. I didn't blame an addictive personality. Like, no, I even in my darkest times, I knew that it was, no, I've made decisions. I've made choices. I didn't realize brain chemistry. I didn't realize dopamine. I didn't realize kind of the science of how I had literally trained myself. But I always knew there was no one to blame other than myself. But that didn't give me any hope. It was like, okay, I've got myself stuck in this cave, and I know I'm the one who got myself here, but I also don't know how to get out of this cave. Like, I don't know how to be healthy, because there would be so many times where I would have another affair. I would confess these things to my wife. I mean, I would confess to her. I'm so sorry. I'll never do it again. And on some level, I meant those words. It wasn't that I was trying to deceive her And in my, I'm actually planning the next one. No, like on some level, I believed that I wouldn't do it again. But nothing changed in my infrastructure. Nothing changed in my routines. So there was no repentance. It was just, this apology followed up by the same behavior, doing the same thing over and over again. What do we call that, right? And it was this dance that we did, as a family. I'm me confessing, my wife Carrie not knowing what the heck to do, but she's trying to raise our kids. She was a stay-at-home mom, so she's raising our kids. She's trying to take care of our boys, and I'm living this whole double life for years. We got married June 4th, 2011. When we got married, I'd already had multiple affairs. Then, for the next several years, it just continued. And then she gave me an ultimatum in 2015, the summer of 2015. She did something that she'd never done before. And she stood up to her abuser, which was me. And she said, if you don't get serious help, if there's not some serious change, then I'm gone. You're going to lose me and the boys. And I believe her. She's not somebody to give, rash statements. I knew that she meant that. So that was the summer of 2015. My sobriety date is May 19th, 2016. Sobriety in the sense of, no pornography, masturbation, sexual acting out, sexual behavior with any women, all of that. So it was almost a year between the ultimatum and really getting some serious traction and getting in a mentorship program, which was like a voluntary house arrest program. So it wasn't a flip of a switch. It wasn't just, okay, great, now I'm healthy. But what happened when she gave me the ultimatum was it did start to spur me on to, okay, I got to try some things. I got to do something differently. And so I did what I'm about to say is very weak verbiage. And that is, I started to do some things differently. It's weak verbiage, but it is accurate because I didn't instantly, change my whole infrastructure and I was incredibly healthy. No, it was like, let me do the bare minimum. Let me kind of half-heartedly do this and half-heartedly check that box. But it was starting to seek out resources, starting to be vulnerable to other people. And then ultimately, what made the biggest difference was when I met guys who I started to meet some guys that had similar stories in the sense of that they had done these things. They had been with prostitutes. They had been addicted to pornography. And that did one thing. That helped me to not quite have so much shame in the sense like I'm all alone, right? But those first several months when I would go to meetings and I would meet people, it took away a little bit of the shame, a little bit of the power of the shame, but I still didn't have any hope because I wasn't meeting people that had like come out the other side. I wasn't meeting anyone that had a transformed life. But the winter, towards the end of 2015 or the start of 2016, that winter, I met a man named Rick. And this guy had a sexual addiction story that spanned decades. I mean, he's my dad's age. But he had been in active recovery and healthy living for years. I don't know, maybe like 8 years, 10 years, something like that at that point. His wife was a leader in sexual betrayal trauma healing. And God used those two, him as my mentor, his wife Patty as Carrie's mentor for the sexual betrayal healing piece. And I got into a voluntary house arrest program for 2 years. And I had to completely submit my decision making and my routines and how I did life, submit all of that and restructure it and throw a lot of it out the window and build new routines and new habits. And Carrie, jumped into recovery for the healing process of the abuse that I had put on her and all of the manipulation and the lies and all of the betrayal. And this recovery process, it was built on 3 principles, really. Number one, and I'm not here to preach at anyone, but I don't back down from the truth. The first principle is if I want true transformative healing, it's going to come through a relationship with Jesus Christ. Without a relationship with my creator, all I'm doing is behavioral change. And so it's built around the spiritual principles of salvation and Christ-centered recovery. But then the second principle, which is we're going to look at science, we're going to look at neural pathways and how does my brain work and how did God create my body and what things can I do to reverse some of these processes that I've put into place, some of the corruption that I've put into place. What does that look like? And then the third is, okay, all that is great, but what practical changes am I doing? What practical, tangible, concrete things am I doing differently on a daily basis? Phone calls every single day to Recovery Brothers, keeping a checklist of, am I crossing boundaries? What red flags am I seeing on a day-to-day basis? What red flags am I putting in my path? What red flags am I responding to? All these different things. What new rules and boundaries do I need to be putting into place to keep myself healthy, to keep others safe around me? All these different things, far outside of just sexual addiction. How am I dealing with my anger as a dad? How am I dealing with selfishness? How am I treating my wife? How am I treating, my finances? How am I treating my body in terms of just physical health? All of these areas where I had a broken, unhealthy infrastructure, and I truly didn't know how to be healthy. And yet, brick by brick, God used these men and used these processes to help me brick by brick rebuild a new infrastructure. And it's been, 8+ years in the making. And I just could not be filled with more gratitude, because I always remember the darkness of where I came from.
What are some of the challenges you and Carrie faced as you began to rebuild your relationship after everything you guys have been through?
So challenges once we started to rebuild things. Yeah. So one of the first things that comes to mind, to be honest, is because I guess I'll preface it with this. This is not going to be everyone's story, and I recognize this, but Carrie and I mean, I can speak for her because I've heard her say it. We both came to a place where when we got into serious recovery, where we were pretty desperate for healthy living. I mean, obviously for different reasons, but we were pretty desperate for healthy living. And so I'm not going to say that I didn't buck on anything or that I was just like the perfect, no, not at all. But we were both pretty willing to do things differently. And so we embraced a lot of these changes. We embraced a lot of the difficult things, not perfectly, but pretty well, I would say. But one of the really hard things was Carrie she didn't have to, but she chose to submit to the wisdom and the counsel of her mentor and my mentor, in the sense of her role is not to be my accountability partner. Her role is not to be my coach, my mentor. Her role is not to be my buddy in the trenches. And now, I mean, 8 years later, we look back at how things used to be and we're like, yeah, that was crazy. But there was a time in our life, especially once I started to go to meetings and I started to do some things differently, where our version of trying to be healthy was I would be accountable to Carrie. I would be, at the fast food place and, text Carrie and be like, okay, hey, the cashier is really attractive and I'm trying not to flirt with her, and, just letting you know. And in my mind, like, I'm trying to be healthy. I'm trying to be accountable for my actions. I'm trying to be accountable. And yet to say something like, even though I'm trying to be healthy, I'm trying to be honest, to say something like that to my wife, like, hey, I'm trying not to flirt with this stranger, that's not the kind of thing that a wife needs to be hearing. Now, if that's the case, that is the kind of thing that I need to be accountable to another brother for, to my recovery brothers, to my mentors, but not to my wife. And so that was hard for me to be accountable to somebody who I didn't know. And I'll explain why. That was hard for Carrie to not get, even though it was hard for her to hear it, she wanted to hear it because it gave her a little bit of a sense of control. And so it was hard for her to give that up, even though we're very, very thankful now that, that they mentored us to not do it that way. I'll just say real quick. I mean, one of the reasons why it was hard for me to give it up, because I knew Carrie, because she knew me, and yet I knew how to play her. I'd done it for years. So she's the last person that I should be accountable to. She's the person that I'd been lying to and manipulating for years. So, the people that I need to be accountable to were guys who had been in my shoes, who knew how to spot a liar, right? They knew how to call out my BS because they'd done it. They'd been in those shoes. And of course, as we've been in recovery, we've been at, Carrie's as good as anyone at spotting the lies and spotting the BS. But it wasn't always that way. So for my sake, and especially for her sake, she needed to be out of that seat. She did not need to be the accountability coach. She needed to be working on her own healing and that process.
So, how can you describe the process of lead now? Because you're leading a recovery group, and how has it impacted your own healing journey?
Yeah, it's been a gigantic difference. Because so I've been in active recovery, for 8 years and a few months. In terms of like basically every single week, I'm going to at least one meeting. The first several years, it was me going for myself, to work on my own healing, to work on my own recovery, to work on my own sobriety, all these things. And then, there's always going to be some semblance of that. Like I'm always going to have accountability in my life. I'm always going to have areas where I can have a dumping ground to share the stressors of life and to share, temptations and areas where I need to work on. Like there's always going to be some of that. But there should be a natural progression in anyone in recovery where at some point I'm no longer in the emergency room, right? Like it's more like physical therapy. Mm-hmm. But what at least in my opinion, for me personally, what shouldn't necessarily happen is that I just stop going. And so there was, okay, well, I need to give back, right? And I need to be here for other brothers, taking their phone calls, giving them feedback, helping them work on their homework assignments. And so I did that, but it was as just another brother in the trenches. And it was around 2020, I believe, 2021, I think, maybe 2021. Rick and Patty, my mentor and Carrie's mentor, who led the women's group, they moved. And when they were getting ready to move, they talked to us, and pretty quickly I was like, yeah, no, I'll take up the mantle. Like it was kind of the natural progression. I mean, it's not a group of 100 guys. Like there's only a few of us, and so yeah, like I felt it as my duty, like to give back and be the leader of the group when they leave and do the mentoring of men and stuff like that. But once I started doing it, it was a huge mindset shift, because now, I mean, I can't emphasize enough. It changed the way I thought about every decision I made. Because, when I'm on Facebook and I see an ad that, I'm not saying it's a bad ad, but, I see an ad with a lady in a bikini, the kind of thing I shouldn't be, focusing my eyes on. Well, if I sit on that ad for, a second before I bounce away or scroll past it or whatever, if that's a visual trigger to me, or, I'm talking to somebody and I have a temptation to let my mind camp on something inappropriate or whatever. There would be times before where I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I probably shouldn't have done that. But now it's like, hold up. Like if I'm leading this men's group, if I'm mentoring men, like, well, how would I feel about it if they were sitting next to me and they saw where my eyes went? How would I feel about it if they were sitting next to me and they heard that joke that I laughed at or whatever, or that movie that I watched that I didn't skip past that one scene or whatever, right? And so just thinking about it through that lens, it's kind of like being a dad, it's like we should, at least if I'm being a dad, I should, think through things on a different lens, because it's not just about me anymore. It's about me and these people that I'm leading, right? Same thing as a mentor, as a leader of this group, is like, okay, yeah, I need to be safe. I need to be worried about, staying sober and getting healthier. But I'm not responsible for these other guys' recovery, but I am a pivotal part of their recovery. I gotta be real careful to stay above board and to be above reproach, and to be, if I'm gonna expect them to be accountable, then I better be first and foremost to be accountable, to be putting my stuff out there. I expect these guys to, put a safety plan together before they go on vacation or whatever. Well, I need to be willing to do the same stuff. And it looks different. I don't always do when I was in the program, I had to make a phone call every single day without fail. I don't make a phone call every single day. I'll tell you right now, though, I do make regular phone calls, and it's not to send a message. It's because I know the value of it. I know the value of it as a tool. And if I have this incredible tool at my disposal, why would I not use it? Right.
What advice would you give to someone who is currently struggling with addiction and feels hopeless?
If you're someone like me, man, when I was in my early to mid 20s, I mean, I had so much despair and self-hatred. I had so much hopelessness. I felt absolutely like I was trapped in this cave and there's no freaking way out. I don't know if there's a way out. I don't know. I don't know what to do. But I'm literally just like counting the days, counting the years until my wife inevitably leaves me, until my wife or until my kids inevitably just grow up enough to like realize who I am and walk away from me. That was the life that I lived. If you're somebody like that, then hear these words. I could not introduce recovery as a tool. I couldn't introduce recovery into my life as a resource, as if it was like something to try. And now I attempted to do that, you know, during that year span after the ultimatum. I tried to try recovery. And the whole idea of the mentorship program is like, no, it's not trying recovery. It's I have to be willing to gut out like almost my entire life, my entire infrastructure, pretty much like completely down to the studs. Like there are some guys that, you know, they will live in a different home than their wife and kids, whether because their wife's request. In some cases, the guy has been like recognized, like I've got so much crap to work on, and so you know they're going to do it really intentionally. They might, you know, they might be another recovery brother and they rent an apartment together or something like that. There's a recovery house that actually is available in Anchorage, Alaska. That's an awesome thing where they do that. And so, you know, I might need to change jobs. Bare minimum, even if I don't do those things, you know, I'm not going on a camping trip just because I want to. I'm not going on vacation just because I want to. If my wife goes out of town and I'm home alone for the weekend, I'm going to have a hardcore safety plan written out. What am I doing every day? What types of things am I okay to do? What types of things am I not okay to do? What are my rules? What are my boundaries? Who am I calling to be accountable for this time? All this stuff. So it's not trying recovery. It's I'm gutting out my infrastructure and then I'm rebuilding an infrastructure centered around recovery. So it is the core pillar of my routine. I had to do that. I couldn't just introduce a dose of recovery and expect to get rid of this gunk that I built. You know, I'd spent years building up this way of doing things. It had to be a complete overhaul.
Okay. So how do you and your wife Carrie work together now to maintain a strong and healthy marriage today?
A couple things. For my part, I keep very short accounts. Because I sin every day. You know, I'm selfish every day. Right? And I don't mean that in like a false sense of humility. I mean that just that's reality. That's being a human. But I do not allow myself to go long without apologizing. Now I make sure I mean it. I don't apologize just because it's the right thing to do. I make sure that I can own the words. But you know, if I'm short with Carrie, especially if I'm short with Carrie in front of the kids, I mean, I'm going to apologize to Carrie. I'm going to apologize to the boys, you know, for talking to their mama like that. If I, you know, am rude to the boys, if I lash out and I yell at them, you know, these kinds of things, I own that stuff and I apologize for that. And that has been a big piece for myself in my own healing. I do believe it's been a huge piece in our relationship, of not holding on to my own garbage. And then, you know, if there is a time where Carrie does offend me, if there's a time where Carrie does do something that I feel is a wrong, okay, well, I can hold resentment against her, or I can be gracious because she has shown me more grace than any human should ever show, right? Or should ever have to show. And so, you know, how much of a fool would I be to hold on to resentment? I mean, that's been a huge piece of it. I mean, there's lots of, you know, specific tangible ways that we've worked on building trust. You know, one of the biggest things there is simply, I mean, simple. It's not easy, but it's simple. Is Carrie was taught early on, there's one thing you can trust. What I'm about to say, this applies if we're talking about addiction, if we're talking about somebody who's been abusive and you know, extreme sociopathic behavior.
It doesn't necessarily have to just be sexual addictions, or it can addiction overall. Yeah,
correct. Anyone with like extreme dysfunction, extreme unhealthy. She was taught, you know, there's one thing you can trust. You can trust Logan's behavior over an extended period of time. Don't trust his words. Don't trust his promises. It doesn't mean that everything I said was a lie, but she wouldn't have a way to know whether I was going to follow through with it or not because I'd been lying for years. But she could trust my behavior over the course of a period of time, for good or for bad. You know, if somebody's a liar and a manipulator, you can trust them to probably continue doing that. If somebody is, you know, following through with integrity and they do it, okay, well, you can probably trust that, right? And so the primary way that we built trust was by her not listening to my words, but listening to my actions, watching my behavior, and seeing that, okay, well, there is a progressive victory. Logan's not becoming perfect, you know, every day, but he is getting more healthy every day than the previous day. He's getting healthier, you know, month over month kind of thing. And so, you know, the words, the promises, those are pretty few and far between. It's a primary focus on behavior, and full transparency. You know, there's, like I emphasized earlier how Carrie's not my accountability, and that's accurate. But what that doesn't mean, it doesn't mean that I'm being secretive. You know, it doesn't mean that I'm hiding things from her. If she truly wants to ask me a question, like if we're in a spot and there's something that happens where she feels like something might have been a trigger, she can ask, like, was that triggering for you? Was that hard for you? Or, you know, now we could debate, or you know, she might debate with a lady on like, well, how healthy is it to ask that question given the circumstance? But like, she's free to ask it and I'll answer it. She's a big girl, right? So like, if she wants to have the answer, I will give her the answer. So it's not that I'm secretive. It's just, she's not my primary accountability, but she can ask me any question, you know, and I will always respond. Like, I mean, big thing I'm doing right now is, you know, going on podcasts and working on Instagram, you know, to put this stuff out there. So there's all kinds of stuff that, you know, I'm talking to people that I've never met before, right? I'm having interactions with people, you know, that I do not know personally, and who knows what ulterior motives people might have. And so with that, there's a lot of accountability. There's a lot of transparency. And Carrie's not my primary accountability, but she always has full permission to ask, you know, about how things are going and if there's any areas of concern. And of course, I will always dive into that stuff, you know, open phone policy kind of thing.
Okay. What role does the Alaskan wilderness play in your life, both in terms of recovery and your family's lifestyle?
Oh, okay, so I grew up in Alaska, and I did not appreciate Alaska for about 30 years. I'm 34 now. Like, I totally took for granted how beautiful it is and how incredible it is that you can, you know, drive literally 90 minutes and get to the ocean. You can drive 90 minutes and get to, you know, Denali National Park, depending on where you live, right? You know, maybe a little bit more than that. You can go to these incredible mountains and glaciers and all these things, and it's just this whole backyard. And I took for granted. But the last few years, especially as our boys have gotten older and we're starting to get into fishing and camping more and stuff like that, I mean, I cherish being able to just be outside. I mean, I'm not the crunchiest dude, but I cherish being able to just get outside and, you know, sit and just look at God's creation, you know, and just look at the sun pouring over a mountain. To get out and, you know, go to a lake, go to a creek, and just enjoy nature. I would be lying if I said like it played a pivotal part of my recovery journey early on. It didn't. I for right or for wrong, it wasn't really part of my MO. But definitely as a dad, as a man now, in the last couple of years especially, I have really prioritized just trying to soak it all up. As cheesy as that might sound, like, I took it for granted for so long, but I try not to do that anymore.
Yeah. You mentioned your relationships with your wife and everything. How have you been able to repair the relationship with your children, and how much work have you had to put into rebuilding those bonds?
That's a great question, and that, honestly, I don't think I've ever been asked that question before. In terms of day to day, in the last couple of years, I've probably done more work there than then rebuilding my relationship with my wife. And that might sound bad, but there's there are the ways that I wounded my wife are very obvious, right? I mean, I was having sexual affairs with other women. I was looking at porn. I was lying to her face. The ways that I wounded my boys with my sexual addiction were very much, they were, I mean, to some extent, it was, it was like 3 steps removed. It was, okay, well, I'm not around quite as much. I'm late getting home and I'm making excuses, or when I am home, I'm very distant because I'm filled with all this despair and self-hatred and stuff. So it's a little bit more removed, but what that did was I was very out of touch with how to respond emotionally in a healthy way. So I had a gigantic anger problem. And to be honest, my anger, that became something that if I was not careful, I could have lost my family several years after getting sober because of my anger. Because I'm not gonna say I conquered sexual addiction, but I'd done a pretty good job of getting free from that. But this was 4 years ago, and I would rage so bad, and I would yell, put holes in drywall, scream at my kids. I mean, I could be a monster with anger as much as I was a monster with sexual addiction. And so I literally, I mean, I had a kind of a come to Jesus moment talking to Carrie, and she's like, she's like, I would have left you if you didn't stop cheating on me. Well, you stopped cheating on me. Don't make me leave you because of anger. And so I had a lot of talks with Recovery Brothers. I had a lot of talks with Carrie, with some folks at church. And I basically was like, all right, there's no program that I can find. I looked for programs. There was no program that like was just this perfect, like, okay, here's a recovery program that's going to be just the same, but it's going to be for anger. But what I ultimately did was I took a bunch of the tools from the mentorship program and I applied them. I started writing papers about my anger, just like I wrote papers about my sexual stuff. I started making daily phone calls for several months. I made a phone call every single day to talk about my anger. And I came up, I had rules and boundaries around how I would deal with life and with my boys when I was angry. So I kind of I took the things that worked. I tweaked them, made them applicable for anger. And I'm sorry, you didn't ask for all that, but it's like, I mean, when I say that when I put probably more work, I mean, it's a daily thing. And of course, raising kids, I mean, it's like the way I always explain it to people that don't have kids, or, if their kids are really, really young, if they're babies, is like, the older my kids get, it's easier and easier to keep them alive. Right. But man, it's harder to raise them, because they've got these hearts, right? And they've got these attitudes and they've got these spirits that are they're different. Every boy's different. Yeah. All 4 boys are my boys, and yet they're all so different. And so trying to feed in and connect with their hearts and, maintain that relationship of being their dad, but loving and encouraging them, but holding them to a standard, and it's hard. It's a hard balance. Yeah. So that's the hardest part about my life and what I work on is the dad aspect.
Okay. Well, how do you hold on, I'm sorry. Are there any, can you share any stories from your recovery group that has deeply impacted you, that has made you go like, man, I'm glad that I'm a part of this group, and hearing these stories has really helped change your life?
Thinking on that. I like these questions. There's a few questions you've hit me with that I've not been asked before, and I love that. There's one thing that comes to mind immediately, and it's not so much a story. I will always remember the first time I heard this brother's story, but it wasn't necessarily this one story. It was this type of thing, was meeting guys. Because like, okay, so I met my mentor, Rick, And I met him at a different group. I met him at a Celebrate Recovery group. Um, and then it was several months later that I actually went with him to a prodigals group, which is the much more intensive sexual addiction focused group. So there was a point in time for a few months where like I knew Rick, I knew his story, but he could just be an exception. He could be an anomaly, right? There might not yet be hope for me. But when I went to the prodigals group, and then over the course of the next few months, the next several weeks at least, and I met other guys, like there's this one brother. His initials are PO, and this brother is, I mean, he's one of the most impactful brothers in my recovery. I mean, this is somebody who has been on some of the darkest, toughest phone calls with me crying, with me angry, with just this brother has been there for me. And like I always remember when I heard his story, because this dude, you look at him, he's like, this dude is like Mr. Rogers. He's like the nicest, most just quiet, peaceful, just loving dude, just raw and genuine and patient. And you would think that this, like, he was saving puppies, you know, like all his life. Like he is this type of personality. Yeah. And then he shared his story. It's like, man, this dude was doing the same stuff I was doing. This dude was hurting his family the same way I was. This dude was doing all this stuff, drugs, prostitutes, the whole 9 yards. And you would never know it. And I don't mean it in the sense that like, oh man, he's got all this hit. It's like, no, he has been through years of healing. He has been through years of transformation. It's not been a quick process. For him to sit in front of me today and be able to say, yeah, that was me, but that's not me anymore. And then of course, proving that out over the course of time. I've known this brother now for 9 years. That gave me so much hope. And hope is something I didn't have before, because it's one thing to meet people who have done similar things. But if, like I alluded to earlier, if I don't meet people who have done similar things and yet they've healed from it, then I'm not going to have hope. So meeting guys like him and hearing their stories of how dark their life was, and yet that was not their life anymore, that's when I was like, okay, I don't know what these guys had to do, but I'm willing to give it a try.
Okay. So how can you explain how recovery has influenced your perspective on life, family, and faith?
Yeah, it's been the biggest perspective shift I can imagine. As I say that, there's a very obvious perspective shift that I know a lot of people have had that I've never had, which would be, you know, if I were to have, you know, cancer and I'm getting told I've got 6 months to live, that would be a perspective shift that I've never had. And that would be a giant one, right? So like, that would be the only other perspective shift I can imagine, almost, where it's like, because I know what it is to come home every day hating my life. I hated the fact that I was a dad. I hated the fact that I was a husband, not because of my family, but because my family had me. And I went through life like that every single day. Every night I came home and I wanted to, like, you know, to pray with my boys and to be the dad they could look up to. And I knew I couldn't, because I was just such a failure. I was such a monster. That's how I felt, you know, every day, laying in bed going, God, why on earth would you create me when all I do is hurt my family? I just hurt everyone around me. So to go from that being my life every single day to now going, hey, my life's not perfect, but I've got a wife that I can come home to, and I don't have sin, or I don't have, you know, shame. I don't have secrets. I don't have a double life. You know, I've got kids that I can come home to, and I'm not perfect, but I can love on them. I can look them in the eye. I can guide them, not from a place of perfection, but from a place of vulnerability and honesty, and go, yeah, that I've got this. You know, my boys, they know our past. They know the things that I did, not in explicit detail, but they know that I was sexually unfaithful. They know that I lied to their mom for years. They know these things, and they know why we go to recovery every Monday night. They call it night church. You know, they know why we work on these things. And we can, and we ask about perspective. I mean, we can have conversations with the boys, and we in very clear terms, we look at it through the perspective of, yeah, okay, here's where we came from. Here's why we look at things this way. Here's why we're going to be honest. Here's why we're going to be transparent. Here's why I'm not going to hold this, hold this burden of this. Like I'm gonna apologize to mama because I don't ever want to let something build again the way that it built before. Here's why I'm not going to hold on to resentment, stuff like that. Everything's through this filter of contentment, gratitude, because I have so much in my life that I do not deserve based on the first several years of my relationship with Carrie. And I don't, when I say that, sometimes I get pushed back when I say I don't deserve. When I'm saying that, like, I recognize that I have done things over the last 8 years to earn trust but like truly in the sense of, I, by any measure of logic, Carrie should have left me the first time, the first time I cheated on her. And that would have been her absolute right. And so, when I say don't deserve, I just mean it through that lens of like, I am so grateful to have my family around, and not just to stay with me, but to jump into healing with me.
Yeah, no, listen, sometimes people see the goodness in you and they're just not willing to give up on it. And she seems like she was that kind of woman that she sees what kind of husband and father you could be, and regardless of everything y'all went through, she stuck by you, and look where you're headed at now. Like, people will come into your life for a reason, and she was meant to be your rock.
Yeah.
And so you're blessed to have her, and for her to continue to be a part of your life. It's a blessing.
Yeah.
So, what message do you hope people take away from your story and your work in recovery?
Quite frankly, it's this, that there is no point of darkness that I can get to that healing is not possible. And I realize that's a really big check to write. But I mean, I'm surrounded by people, much more than just my story, more than Carrie's story. I'm surrounded by people in recovery that can cash that check. And that's on both sides of the coin. There's no point of addiction, of hurt, of sin that I can get to that I cannot heal from. And then on the other end, there's no amount of damage, of destruction, of pain that I can experience that there cannot be healing from. And that doesn't mean, of course, that there's not natural consequences. One of the guys that I'm closest to in recovery, he went to prison for years because of where he took his addiction. And he, for the rest of his life, is going to have some very extreme consequences because of that. But that doesn't mean that there's not a tremendous amount of healing that this brother has gone through. And I've been blessed to be a witness to it. I've walked with him and worked with him on recovery assignments, on, hours upon hours sitting in recovery rooms with this dude. And he's like, yeah, he's got a lot of natural consequences that he's going to live with, but he's also experiencing a tremendous amount of healing.
Okay. All right, man. This has been a great conversation. I'm glad you were able to come and share your story with us. Now it's come where you get the solo screen and you get to let people know where they can find you, website, anything that can help them with getting in touch with you if they need to speak to someone.
Yeah. With me, it's going to be pretty short and sweet. All my work, I'm basically focused on two things: going on podcasts, which is I like to look at as I'm shouting from different rooftops, any rooftop that I'm blessed to be able to go on and shout from. And otherwise, my primary work is on Instagram. So you can see, under my name here, No Longer in Bondage. If you search No Longer in Bondage, I'll come up. My handle is at longer period in period bondage. So periods in between each word, no longer in bondage. And that is quite frankly because to be able to say now that I'm no longer in bondage to sexual addiction, that's a phrase that I cherish because I could not say that for the first 25 years of my life, and didn't think I could ever say it. But Instagram, I put out consistent, a a lot of videos talking about, the inside the mind of an addict, practical, tangible recovery tools, a lot of insight and awareness to what it is to struggle with addiction, what it is to struggle on the other side, the betrayal trauma piece. What you're not going to find on my Instagram is, just the trendy Bible verse of the day, or, a cute little motivational poster. I suppose there's a place for that, but for me, it's getting down to the meat of it. What does it look like to be unhealthy? What things can I work on? How can I work on this stuff? Not just theoretical, but like tangible, concrete, measurable things that we can put into place to be healthier and to heal, because that's what it's all about.
Awesome, man. Thank you once again for being a guest. I greatly appreciate it. Um, it was a great show. Hopefully, people can take something from your story, man. It's an amazing story, and again, like you've been blessed to still have your family and everything, and now you're leading other men, other brothers, and so it's a blessing for you to continue to do what you're doing, man, and just keep shining, man. Keep shining bright, brother, because you come out of a dark place, and now you're making a difference. You're definitely making a difference. So continue to do what you're doing, because there are people out there that need your help, and so I appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your story, because I know sharing your story isn't easy, but it's something that needed to be said, and I appreciate you opening up and sharing.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I very much appreciate it.
Pleasure's all mine. But don't leave just yet. I want to talk to you off screen a little bit, but once again, thank you, man. Thank you for coming on and opening up. It really is important, and I greatly appreciate it. All right, another great episode. It's important that people realize any type of addiction is you need help, and so that's why I started this platform, is to give people an opportunity to share their stories, because there are people out there that need to hear these stories, and I'm blessed to be able to do that. But shout out to my Real Wise fam, Poppy J, Brandy J, love you guys. Shout out to the boss lady, love you and appreciate you for everything you've done for me and continue to do for our family. Shout out to Logan for coming through and sharing his story. And as always, a big shout out to all the essential workers out there. God bless y'all. Be safe. And if you haven't subscribed, please do hit the notification bells. Check out the new episodes. I greatly appreciate everybody out there for supporting the show. You know how your boy Wise does it. Peace out.